Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dawn Hughes from the Central Illinois Adult Education Service Center. Just a couple of housekeeping items. You are going to be muted throughout the entire presentation. If you happen to lose your audio or video connection, try exiting the webinar and entering again. You can also call in using the number and access code shown in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. That information is also available in the chat as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started. As I said, my name is Dawn Hughes, and Catherine Porter is also joining me from the Professional Development Network. Together, we will be presenting the CASAS Goals series for ABE, ASE, an overview and next steps. We know that we will be covering a lot of information in a short period of time today. So if you have a question during the webinar, please jot it down. We will be saving time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. We won't be able to answer policy questions today, but we can pass those along to ICCB. Also, any questions that we don't have time to answer today will be collected and answered in a future FAQ. Also, please notice that there are two handouts that you can download from the GoToWebinar platform. One is a copy of today's presentation, and the other is a TABE 1112 CASAS Goals comparison chart. We will be referencing the chart later in the presentation. Next. Today's webinar will not focus on how to give the test. That's the purpose of the implementation training. During today's session, we are going to discuss Illinois' CASAS Goals Pilot, ICCB FY21 Assessment Guidelines for ABE ASE, the CASAS Goals Overview, required training, models for implementation, and next steps for programs. ICCB asked the PDN to pilot CASAS Goals. The purpose of the pilot was to gather information to inform and facilitate a potential statewide rollout of the CASAS Goals assessments for ABE ASE. In the fall of 2019, 4 Illinois adult education programs successfully implemented CASAS Goals. Both the reading and math tests were piloted, as well as the e-test and paper tests. As you can see, it was decided that the CASAS Goals assessment should be rolled out statewide. The next two slides will focus on ICCB's FY21 Assessment Guidelines for ABE ASE. Programs may continue using TABE 1112 in FY21. Starting on July 1st, 2020, the use of CASAS Goals for ABE ASE is optional for FY21. Programs can choose to shift students from one test series to the other during the fiscal year if desired. Each pre- and post-test sequence must be within the same test series. That is, if TABE is given as a pre-test, then TABE must be given as the post-test. If CASAS is given as a pre-test, then CASAS must be given as a post-test. All ABE and ASE students must be given a reading test, either TABE 1112 reading or CASAS Goals reading, with the exception of courses classified as math only. To avoid test fatigue, students should not be tested with both TABE 1112 math and reading and CASAS Goals math and reading during the same testing session. That would be 4 tests. Programs have the flexibility to choose between reading and math assessments as long as the pre- and post-testing sequence is within the same test series. For example, programs could choose to give a student CASAS Goals reading but also TABE 1112 math, or vice versa. ICCB will be providing policy and DAISY details prior to FY21. In the next section of our presentation, Catherine will be sharing an overview of CASAS goals.
Good morning, everyone. This is Catherine Porter from the ALRC. I was certified by CASAS as a trainer in 2011, back when Illinois adopted the CASAS Life and Work Series for ESL. And over the years, I have seen many of you and your teachers in CASAS training that I've done for the ESL side of the house. But today, of course, we are looking at the new CASAS series for ABE, ASE, the Goals Series. Let's just have a quick review of what CASAS is. So CASAS is a nonprofit organization started in the 1980s. CASAS assessments are very widely used, currently in 38 states. CASAS tests are approved for WIOA reporting for both Title II and Title I. So what does CASAS stand for? It's the Comprehensive Adult Student Assessment Systems. So sometimes people talk about the CASAS test, or they say, I use the CASAS. But there is not one CASAS test. There are many CASAS test series. And today we're looking at the Goals series. All of the CASAS series are based on an integrated systems approach, where the 4 areas you see here are interrelated. The tests reflect local curriculum, assessing both state and national content standards. The tests are available in both paper and computer-based formats. The computer tests, called the e-tests or electronic tests, can be given on computers, iPads, and Chromebooks, and are touchscreen compatible. We'll look a little later at some of the important advantages of e-testing over paper testing. CASAS has an online database called Quick Search, which correlates published instructional materials to test content. And lastly, CASAS has its own software system called TOPS Pro, which can be used to automatically score tests, to track student progress, and to generate a number of useful reports. And we'll look at some of those reports a bit later as well. So this slide has important information about current NRS approval dates that may impact your decisions about what tests to use in FY21. So I'm going to take some time to go through this. On the left side is CASAS ABE and ASE testing. Goals reading, like TABE 1112 reading and TABE 1112 math, received a 7-year approval from OCTAE. The 7-year approval is to February of 2025. Goals Math, however, received 3-year conditional approval to March of 2022. CASAS is currently conducting additional field testing and will likely be adjusting the math by adding additional levels. There are currently 2 levels. The PDN recommends that if you choose to use CASAS Goals Math in FY21, that you use the e-test, not the paper test. That's because with the e-test, any updates, such as new test levels, are available automatically. If you buy the paper math test and other levels are added in the future, you will probably need to purchase new paper tests. So that's something to keep in mind as you go back to your programs and try to think about what you're going to do next fiscal year. On the right side of the chart, you see CASAS for ESL, the Life and Work Reading Series, which is very widely used in Illinois. This assessment has NRS approval to February of 2021, which is less than a year away. However, don't let that date cause you to be too alarmed, because the approval date will almost certainly be extended by OCTAE, since all 3 test publishers, DRC, CASAS, and CAL, will be submitting revised ESL tests that assess OCTAE's English Language Proficiency Standards, or the ELP standards. The current NRS approved ESL tests that we're using here in Illinois do not assess the ELP standards, but the new tests will. However, it may be some time before the revised ESL tests are submitted and approved, since field testing of new test items has temporarily halted due to COVID-19. When new test series are approved, or when the approval dates you see here, any of them, are extended, this is published in the Federal Register, and of course, the ICCB and the PDN will let you know. So that's the background on the NRS approval issues. So now let's take a look at reading goals followed by math goals. First of all, why the name goals? So here's something probably none of you have thought about or know, and that's that GOALS stands for Greater Opportunities for Adult Learning Success. The GOALS reading that you see here has 4 levels and 8 forms. For those of you familiar with the CASAS Life and Work reading series, you'll see that GOALS follows the same color scheme. So level A are the blue tests, level B the green, level C the brown, and level D the red. This chart shows the 4 CASAS levels, that's A through D, as well as the 8 test forms for reading. Those are 901 through 908. The chart also shows the locator and the appraisal. Those are near the top of the chart. Locators are available only in e-tests. So the way it works is that based on the student's locator result, the computer will immediately and seamlessly administer the right pretest, all within the same testing session. Appraisals are used with paper testing to place learners into the correct pretest level. So the locator is not a standalone test. It is part of the e-test system. But the appraisal is a separate paper test. So if you go back to our previous slide, you'll see that very first test up in the upper left corner. That's the reading appraisal that would be used with the paper test. And then you see the 8 test forms. You'll see that the locator is shorter, 15 minutes, versus 30 minutes for the paper. But that's just for the e-test. We'll look a little closer at test timing in a few minutes, but first let's look at the math assessments. So here are the math tests, and you'll notice that the math test has fewer forms. As I mentioned earlier, 2 levels with 2 forms each. The yellow test on the left is the appraisal for paper testing. The 2 math levels are AB and CD. As I said a few minutes ago, CASAS is conducting additional field testing and will likely be adding levels to the math goals sometime in the future. And again, the locator is available only in e-tests, while the appraisals are used with paper testing. For the math tests, formula are provided so that students can focus on concepts and skills rather than on memorization. And as for calculators, calculators are provided on screen with the e-test, and we'll see an example in a few minutes. And for paper testing, the program must provide students with calculators. So here's a summary of test timing. If you give both reading and math goals, it takes 2.5 to 3 hours. For both reading and math, some pre and post test levels are 60 minutes, while others are 75 minutes. For reading goals, level A is 60 minutes, the other levels 75 minutes. For math goals, reading is 60 minutes for level AB and 75 minutes for level C and D. This slide and the next show the correlations of goal score ranges to the NRS educational functioning levels for ABE, ASE. You may remember that Octave revised the EFL descriptors in 2016, raising the rigor to align with the CCR standards. These charts will be found in the FY21 ICCB Provider Manual. And they're important so that you know at what points students will make a measurable skill gain, or MSG, one of the WIOA performance measures. The charts also provide the grade level equivalences for your references, and these are especially relevant to our Title I partners. So this is the reading chart, and now let's look at the math. So notice here that there are 3 intermediate math levels, low, middle, and high, and only 1 advanced level corresponding to adult secondary education. These are the NRS EFLs for mathematics that Octay revised in 2016 to align with the CCR standards, and goals math is aligned accordingly. Again, these charts will be found in the FY21 Provider Manual. So let's take a closer look at what is on the goals test. That's what is being assessed. But before we take that real close look, I'd like to briefly mention testing accommodations. For students with documented disabilities, you may provide the accommodations shown here without contacting CASAS. The link on this slide will take you directly to additional information on the CASAS website. And as Dawn said earlier, we are providing this PowerPoint as a PDF with live links. It's found in your GoToWebinar platform, so it's attached there today for you. And in addition to the PowerPoint slides, as Dawn mentioned this earlier as well, you may have come in a few minutes late, we have provided for you a side-by-side comparison chart of Table 1112 and CASAS goals. And I think this chart will be very helpful to you in informing your decisions about which test and which test forms to adopt. One of the categories in that chart is accommodations and accessibility. And that will help you see the differences and similarities more clearly between these 2 test series and the accommodations that are available. So now let's take a look at the test content. So you've heard me mention the CCR standards several times. That is the National College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education. And the goals series is aligned with these standards. You can see the reading anchor standards down the right column here. And this slide also shows that goals reading skills are grounded in Webb's depth of knowledge, or we often say DOK, depth of knowledge. That is the depth of cognitive demand. So the reading comprehension skills of locating detail or main idea correspond to DOK 1, while the higher order reading skills that you see here are DOK 2 and 3 and require and assessing greater cognitive demand. So there is a more user-friendly way to present this same kind of information that's especially helpful to teachers. And that's the blueprints. So here we see the goals blueprints, which has easy to read graphics. This is one of the goals reading blueprints. This one is level A. You'll see it shows the percentage of questions by skill. It includes the DOK levels, and it shows the CCRS correlations, which are also referenced in the Illinois ABE ASE content standards. Here's one of the math goals blueprints, which indicates the percentage of questions by mathematical area in addition to the CCR correlations. Again, referenced in the Illinois ABE ASE content standards. So what do the tests look like? So far today, we've only seen the covers of the tests and the blueprints. But let's take a brief look inside the actual tests. We'll do this by looking at 2 of the sample test items. These are available on the CASAS website and can be accessed by you or by your teachers or by students at any time. There are both web-based samples of the e-test and PDF samples of the paper tests. And here in this slide, we have linked to both of those areas. So the link at the top goes right to the CASAS e-test, and the e-test sampler will be going there in a few minutes. And on the right side, you'll see the links to the actual PDFs of the different level sample tests for reading goals. Some of the benefits of using the sample test items are listed here on the slide, but Dawn and I recommend that you review them carefully following the webinar to help inform your decisions about adopting CASAS goals. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the PowerPoint, and we'll have a quick look at an e-test for reading and one for math. So I'm going to go out to the CASAS portal. And you'll see here that we have sample test items for life and work reading. That's our ESL test that many of you know. If you've never been here to look at the sample e-test, please do it. And then we have reading goals at all 4 levels and math. So we're going to have a look at reading goals level C. Sometimes the site's a little bit glitchy. So the way it works here is that there are 2 practice questions and 19 sample questions. We're not going to look at all these samples today, but I do want to point out a few of the features here. So this is the sample. So we have, let me just do one thing here so I can see my screen a little better. There we go. So we have our test prompt here on the left, and we have our question on the right. Up at the top, you'll see we have 2 practice items. So it's telling me I have 1 of 2. So this is a vocabulary item. So the student will just continue. For our practice items, it will tell me whether or not I've got them right, but in the actual test, it won't. Down here, I wanted to show that we can enlarge. We can enlarge the font. So this is a general comprehension question. And those were my practice items. And now we're actually beginning my sample test. So there are 19 items here, and I'm not going to take you through them, as I said, but I'll just click through a few. The 2 of 3 up here means that this test prompt has 3 questions, and now I'm on the second of the third. You'll see if I go here, that's my last one for this item. I'm going quickly just to give you a sense of it. And then a new item comes up, and this one has 4 questions related. We also have across the top a progress bar, and that can help students kind of stay on track. All right, so those are some of the features of the reading test. I also want to show you the math test. I think if I click back, I'll be able to get to math. Yep, there's math. So for the sample math test, we don't have all the levels. So I suspect that CASAS will be adding those once they have added additional levels to the math test. And then I suspect we will have additional math levels in the sample test. Right now we just have 1. It has 1 practice question and 9 sample questions. So here we have our practice question. So we're calculating. I will show you up here is the calculator that is available throughout the test. That's also true with the paper test. Students can use a calculator throughout the entire test. So I think that might be a difference between the TABE and the CASAS. I got that one wrong. And it's telling me because that's the practice. And then again, we have 9 items here in my sample test. And I have to tell you that as an English teacher, just looking at these math problems is giving me a little anxiety. So I'm going to X out of here. I think I've given you the idea. Same thing, we'll have a progress bar across the top. We have the ability to enlarge and so on. Okay, so we're going to go back to our PowerPoint. So those are the sample test items. And as I said a few minutes ago, you'll want to spend some time afterward having a look through. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the advantages of the e-test that we just had a look at. One thing I will say is that in the Illinois Goals pilot that was held last fall, both administrators and students reported that the CASAS Goals e-test was especially user-friendly. Students seemed to really enjoy it. So I said earlier that the e-test can be given on computers, iPads, and Chromebooks. The ability of touchscreens is great for our students with low literacy or low digital literacy. That's a really nice feature. We have the automatic conversion of raw to scale scores, so reducing human error is important for accuracy and valid scores. Automatic scoring saves a lot of staff time and therefore dollars. We have the appropriate next test level and form is automatically assigned, and it can become a little cumbersome in CASAS having to look at all those charts, so this is a much more streamlined process with the e-test. And as we said earlier, the latest updates to tests are automatically available with the e-test. So if, for example, the math test would change, it will just automatically change within the system. Web-based testing units are called WTUs. They never expire, and they can be used with any CASAS test, including the ESL test or any the ABE test, reading or math. So one web unit fits any test. And the last point I'll mention is that they readily generate reports, including the individual skills profile to help teachers plan and target their instruction. And we're going to talk now a little bit about the reports that are available. So the easiest way to generate reports is by using the CASAS e-test. The CASAS TOPS Pro Enterprise software, which interfaces with the e-test, generates a wide variety of reports. You see here on the screen that it is possible to scan CASAS answer sheets from paper testing into TOPS Pro. However, it's important to note the following. CASAS Goals uses OMR scanners. That OMR stands for Optical Mark Recognition Scanners. These are scanners like Scantron that read number 2 lead pencils. They are not the low-cost scanners that can be used with TABE 1112. New OMR scanners are costly, about $3,000. So this is an important budgetary consideration. The scanners, the OMR scanners that you may have used with TABE 910 are compatible with CASAS Goals. So if you have those scanners available, they will work. On the handout that compares the TABE 1112 and the CASAS Goals, we have additional information about scanning paper tests. So you'll want to review that and have a look at that. And lastly, it is possible to manually enter information into TOPS Pro in order to generate reports. So let's look at one of the many reports that can be generated. This here is the individual skills profile report, and it shows the percentage correct of the CASAS competencies, of the CCR content areas, and the CCR anchor standards. You see all that there. And then since that type's a little small to read, I have enlarged the part that's in the red circle down there. And we'll look at that on the next slide. This includes the likelihood of the student to pass the HiSET exam. In this example, Jason has a likelihood of 78% to pass the language arts reading subsection of the HiSET. And CASAS is currently conducting studies with the GED, so the GED correlations will also be added in the near future. Those studies are ongoing. So that is part of the individual skills profile report, the likelihood of a student to pass one or both of those tests. So now what I'm going to do is turn it back to Dawn. She's going to talk to you about required training. Today, as Dawn mentioned earlier, we aren't training anyone in how to give the test or any of those logistics, but we're just giving you general information to help inform your decision about adopting or not adopting CASAS goals next year. So I will turn it over to Dawn.
So just like the rollout with Table 1112, there will be required training also for CASAS goals. All administrators with ABE ASE programming are required to attend today's webinar or complete the iLearn course, CASAS Goals Overview for Administrators. The iLearn course will be very similar to the content of today's session and will be available soon. As I stated earlier, today's webinar does not focus on how to give the test. That's the purpose of the implementation training. Therefore, all CASAS Goals test administrators are required to complete CASAS implementation training through the PDN. The CASAS implementation training will be available virtually in mid-May. Please watch for the training schedule and registration information that will be coming out soon. All agencies that choose to adopt CASAS goals need to attend the implementation training even if they have already attended CASAS implementation for ESL. The goals series is different. Finally, it's important to mention that CASAS does not allow agencies to order testing material without attending CASAS implementation training. The next section, we will focus on models for implementation, including examples and considerations that you as a program administrator will need to explore and discuss with your team. It is important to note that if a program chooses to adopt CASAS goals, it does not have to adopt immediately or program-wide. Implementation can be in phases. In fact, that is something that the PDN and ICCB recommends. One consideration for your program will be budgetary. As an example, your program might decide to use remaining TABE 1112 computer-based tests for continuing students and use CASAS goals only for newly enrolled students. You could then assess results mid-year to inform decisions about expanding the use of CASAS goals for the remainder of FY21 and or FY22. Another consideration for your program should be location. Perhaps your program could use TABE 1112 paper-based tests at off-site locations where internet is not available and use CASAS Goals e-test on-site. The third consideration to be mindful of is your type of enrollment. Your program might decide to explore using CASAS goals for bridge students, but continue to use TABE 1112 for other ABE ASE students, or vice versa. In case you joined us later in the presentation, please notice that there are two handouts that you can download from the GoToWebinar platform. One is a copy of today's presentation. The other is a TABE 1112 CASAS Goals Comparison Chart. We hope that the chart is a helpful resource for your program. It might also reveal some other issues and considerations that your program should discuss prior to CASAS Goals implementation. So as we are nearing the end of our presentation, we have listed some next steps for your program. If your program chooses to use CASAS goals starting in FY21, then you will need to decide who in your program should attend the virtual CASAS implementation training. Please watch your email for the announcement of the May PDN implementation training webinars. Second, start exploring the costs related to CASAS goals. CPC is currently negotiating reduced pricing with CASAS. It should be noted that on the comparison chart that we gave you access to, if you plan to use the paper CASAS goals test, the scanner does cost more than $3,000. Finally, remember that CASAS does not permit agencies to order testing material without attending the CASAS implementation training.
This is Catherine again, and I'm going to show you around the CASAS catalog because this will help you get a sense for costs. And with the caveat, as Dawn just mentioned, that we are currently in the process of negotiating a slightly lower cost for you. So stay tuned for that. But we will kind of have a look right now at the rack rates, if you will. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint for a minute and go to the we're going to go to the catalog. CASAS has a virtual catalog, and we're going to look inside of it. I'm going to make this a little larger for you. Let's see if I can do that. 1 minute here. Doesn't seem to want to enlarge too much. Whoops, that made it smaller. That didn't help anything. Oh dear. Just give me a second here. Let me get this enlarged for you. Guess that's as large as we're going to get. So, whoops, nope, there we go. We're going to go to the reading and the goals pages in the catalog. So you'll see here all the test booklets and the testing manual. And the test booklet price, I'll enlarge that for you so you can see a little better. They come in sets of 25. Let's see if we can move over a little. Whoops, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. Excuse me. That turned the page. So they come in sets of 25 for $100, which is $4 per test booklet. So that is somewhat more than the Life and Work Reading Series for ESL that you're used to using. And that is because the CASAS goals tests are in full color, so they are a little pricier. A nice feature, however, if we look at up here, you'll see that you can buy sets, full sets of all the forms with only 5 of each, or excuse me, 10 of each, or 25 of each. So that is nicer for smaller programs. You can buy smaller amounts. You don't have to buy 25 of each. I want to point out at the top of the page, it says training requirement. Module 1, Module 2, Module 3. Those are the CASAS implementation training modules. And the training that Dawn was referring to a few minutes ago, that the PDN will be conducting in May, does cover all 3 of these modules. So once one has completed those modules, your agency is able to order the CASAS goals tests. So that is a prerequisite for ordering any CASAS materials. Let's go back to the table of contents here. Oh, well, just to point out, so here's CASAS reading, here's CASAS math. We go back to our table of contents. We have also our appraisal tests. So those are appraisal for reading, that's if you're paper testing, and appraisal for math. And CASAS does recommend that you always have some paper tests available, even if you are doing e-testing. And that is because there are occasional technical issues, and you don't want a technical issue to keep a student from testing if they're there present. So if you have paper tests as backup, that's a great option. You may have some students with digital literacy limitations for whom the paper test is a better option as well. So we do really strongly recommend that your agency is trained in both paper and the e-test, the computer test, and that will be covered in the implementation training. So that is a little overview of the catalog. And there's one more part of the catalog I want to show you, but we'll do it through a slide because it's a little hard to read here. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So that's the CASAS Catalog. And so this is a page from the catalog that talks about TOPS Pro Enterprise. So it's important to understand the difference between what's called basic TOPS Pro Enterprise, or TE, and enhanced TOPS Pro Enterprise, or TE. So the basic package, this is the e-test. So when you order the web-based testing units, it's based on quantity, and you'll see the cost ranges on the low end, the higher end, excuse me, for the lowest quantity, $285. And if you're a very large program ordering over 1,000, that's $1.75. This is per test administration, or per WTU, web-based testing unit. But remember, as it says on the top of this page, those prices are being negotiated, but those are the catalog prices. So with the basic package, you receive automatically access to the individual student reports. We looked earlier at one of these, which was the skills profile, the very first one listed here, but there are many other reports that you can generate as well. Of particular importance to you would be the next assigned test report, personal score report, the test history, so you can see what test students has had and their test scores. And of course, you can check your existing balance of number of test administrations. So that is all included in these costs. The main difference between the basic and the enhanced package is that the enhanced package has class summaries. So rather than just individual summaries, it can aggregate students into a class and produce a class summary. It's also important to note that the enhanced version does include many of these federal reports and state level reports that in Illinois DAISY will generate. So in essence, in practicality rather, many Illinois programs stick with TE Basic because in fact DAISY does an awful lot of the things that you're paying more for over here in the enhanced. So it is important to understand this difference in what you get depending on these two different price points. So that's a look at the TOPS Pro Enterprise. All right, so I think we're now ready to move away from ordering of test materials into answering some of your questions. Dawn has probably been reviewing them, and I did notice one about cost for the implementation training. There is no cost to the implementation training, so and there never has been cost, so that will be a PDN event, no cost. Dawn, have you been reviewing questions, and do you have a few more to answer here? Great.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So if you do have a question, please feel free to review your notes, and you can add that to the question box at this time. I have been trying to answer as many questions as possible and replying with those answers to the entire audience. So all the participants are seeing the questions asked and those answered. So I think at this time, Catherine, there's maybe two kind of hanging out there. One is one from Tricia Wagner, and there's one from Jeff Campbell if you want to look at those. Val just asked, will our WIOA Title I partners be able to use CASAS goals? We have been in touch with our Title I partner, and we are working with them much in the same way that we did with TABE 1112. And so because CASAS requires the implementation training before the product can be purchased from them, they will have to go through much of the same process that Title II will have to go through.
Yes, I think actually, Dawn, as I look through these questions, We hadn't planned to do this, but I really think it will be useful to go back to some of our, I'm trying to escape here. My computer sometimes is freezing. Yeah, great. I'm going to go back to some of those policy slides. They are not exactly policy, but let's just review these one more time. Some people came in a few minutes late, and so let's just review these briefly because many of you are asking these same questions again. So do you want to do this, Dawn, or do you want me to do this?
No, I can. That's fine. Perfect.
Yeah, I think we should go through these one more time because it's just now that you've seen the whole lay of the land, let's come back to some of these specific issues that you have. Go ahead.
Okay. So as we mentioned before, programs may continue using TABE 1112 and FY21. Starting on July 1st, 2020, the use of CASAS goals for ABE ASE is optional for FY21. As a program, you can choose to shift students from one test series to the other during the fiscal year if desired. Each pre- and post-test sequence must be within the same test series. So that is, if TABE is given as a pre-test, TABE must be given as the post-test. And if CASAS is given as the pre-test, CASAS must be given as the post-test. And then on the next slide,
I'm just going, because Jeff had asked this question, but you may choose at some point to make a switch. So, but if you do make a switch, there will be some moment of time when you're going to have to test the student with both tests, right? If you're going to finish the TABE post-test sequence, then you need to start with a pre-test in CASAS. Hopefully not on the same day, because that would be a lot of testing. But there will be some point where if you choose to make this switch, you will have to give a student both tests. I hope that's clear. Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
All ABE ASE students must be given a reading test, so that could either be the TABE 1112 reading or CASAS goals reading, with the exception of courses that are classified as math only. Catherine just alluded to the next one, so I will skip to the third bullet on this slide, that programs have the flexibility to choose between reading and math assessments as long as the pre- and post-testing sequence is within the same series. For example, programs could choose to give a student CASAS goals reading, but also TABE 1112 math or vice versa. And also, please keep in mind that ICCB will be providing policy and DAISY details prior to FY21.
Good. So I think that helps answer a number of the questions that I was seeing coming in. But I am going to pop back to the questions and see if there are any more in there, especially if that second look through those guidelines has sparked any additional questions. Let's have a look here. Will TABE 1112 be able to use after FY21? That's a good question. We don't have the answer. I suspect the answer will be yes, but as Dawn and I have said, we don't necessarily have all the policy issues at today.
Well, as far as we know, both TABE 1112 and CASAS goals will be available for ABE ASE students in FY21.
Yes, I think they meant beyond FY21, but it's hard to look that far in the future. Yeah, maybe I misunderstood. Great. Okay, I am popping through to see if there's any other questions that we can answer today.
There's one about, is the appraisal required for the goal series?
So if you are paper testing, the appraisal would be given one time. That's when a student first enters your program in order to find out what test level is appropriate. That's much like the TABE locator. However, after that point, the actual score on the pretest will tell you what post-test to give. And so it really is a one-time initial test administration when paper testing.
And then there was another question, is the CASAS Goal e-test web-based or is it a program that must be downloaded?
Good question. So originally, if you go way back in time, it was all web-based. Sorry, yes, it was all, downloadable. But CASAS has slowly been making that unavailable and moving to web-based. And I think it's not even possible at this point to get the downloadable version any longer. I think it's all web-based, although I have heard of exceptions that are made, for example, in the corrections world. So typically web-based. For special circumstances, downloadable. I think that's the best answer for that one.
Okay, I don't see any new questions that have come in. Ones that we can answer anyway.
Right. Right. Okay, I'm looking just one last time through the questions. Here's a question. It's an ESL type question, but I'll answer it. Is there a timeline for ICCB to approve CASAS goals for ESL students? So that is not in the hands of ICCB, that's in the hands of OCTAE. So OCTAE will be reviewing tests that are revised for ESL so that they align with the English language proficiency standards. So none of those tests have yet been submitted to OCTAE, so it's some time out between before we will see approval of any new tests for ESL. It's going to be some time yet. So that is an OCTAE decision first and then an ICCB decision second. Hope that's helpful in answering that question. Okay. Dawn, any other questions coming in?
I don't see any new ones right now.
Okay. So the good news is I think we're ending a few minutes earlier and giving people a slightly longer break before the next session. Did you want to?
Right. Yeah, I can wrap up if you can go to the last slide.
Yes, I've made a discovery. I cannot do that until I get rid of my question box here. So one moment, and then I will.
Okay.
I need to.
So again, if you have questions, you can feel free to submit them through the FAQ you can continue to submit them through the question box in this platform. Keep in mind that there are 2 handouts available. So if you have not downloaded those yet, you might want to go into the menu for GoToWebinar, download those 2 handouts. On the very last slide in our presentation, you will see both of our contact information, so feel free to reach out to us if you still have a question and you weren't able to submit it into the chat feature today. Catherine and I will be compiling the FAQ later this week and working with ICCB on getting your questions answered. So just as a reminder before you go, that there is one final webinar today, which will be starting at 12:30. So please be sure that you log in shortly before that time because we are starting all of our sessions very promptly at their designated start time today, and we don't want you to miss anything. So I think that is all, right, Catherine?
I think that's it. Okay,
all right,
it's
so everybody
been really
have
a pleasure.
Great lunch.
Yep, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.